Carl Hermans, welcome to Australia.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending this time with us. I'm going to kick off with a question that I would love to ask you, and that is, when were you actually courageous enough to, and why were you courageous enough to name your company Be Courageous?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I love being back in Australia, so it's awesome. Be Courageous is my third company, but this is the one that I think is probably the most courageous. And the name was actually born out of a situation which was also what sparked the seed of like, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to channel my focus. I was helping build a different global consultancy, and we had a head office in Boston, and it was a very, very cold, wintry day where we had all of our global team came in for our own internal planning and offsite. And in that meeting, it was a real tension point hit where that tension point later turned into a lot of the company members sort of splitting off into two different agencies. But what was happening in the room, and we're a creative consultancy, so our job is to facilitate breakthroughs. And what was happening in the room was that there was a disagreement, a tension point that came up around the future. And on the screen was a quote that we are synonymous of presenting at the time, which was called, from one of the founders of that company, his name was George Prince, and it was another word for creativity is courage. And we always talked about that, which is like lean into your creativity and, let's create the conditions and do brainstorming and, create the sand pit and have a lot of fun with that. But in this particular case, there was none of that happening. There was arguments and massive tension points. And I had this revelation, which was, wait a second, both sides had equally powerful arguments. Both saw a future that they wanted to materialize. And they were really deeply, in a conflicted way, trying to convince the other side why their view of the future was if not more important than the other. And I saw this quote, saw this tension happening, and said, actually, another word for creativity is courage, is another word to actually express what's inside of you. Takes an immense amount of courage. And a lot of the time, creativity, true creativity, doesn't come from perfect conditions or happy environments and bells and whistles. It comes from extreme tension. It comes from a survival mode. It comes from fear. And it takes courage to lean into that. And so I had that, and honestly, it's, without sounding dramatic and weird, I had this bolt of light moment where it was like, it's about being courageous. It hit me. And I sort of saw my own future, which was like, this is what I want to do. I want to go around the world and create a company that helps people to tap into the thing that they want to really do in their life, but they're held back by a fear. And so how do you start to believe in something greater than what you're fearing? And that in itself was a courageous act. So the name was like, we just have to call this Be Courageous, because it just does what it says on the side of the box. It's about courage. And that's how that all sort of started for me.
It's fantastic. So that bolt is something that is a gift, and that's something that we both love to give to other people.
That's right.
How have you found, what are your best techniques? I don't want to, I know that's like a how long's a piece of string, and it's very...
Oh, no, sure.
But what are the techniques that you use? So how do you work people into that point of, this is where you need to land?
Yeah, a great question. I'll preface it by saying that I believe that we have to create a relationship with our creativity, and we have to create a relationship with our intuition. And I almost have this visual that I sometimes draw, and I will say it in sessions and workshops, which is I say, imagine that you have a straw, and that straw you can put up into a soup that's out there in the world, like a fluid or like a veil. It punches through this veil, and you can put this into a creative source, and you can sip from this creative source, and it gifts you ideas, it gifts you inspiration, it chooses you, and something comes into you, and then there's so many sessions we've had around the world where somebody says, I thought of that idea once. So I think what happens is that we tap into this creative place through our intuition, through our trust of self, through our trust of something bigger, and we're gifted an idea. And then it's up to us whether we're actually ready to do it or not. And if we're not, it pops away from us, and it goes and finds somebody else and drops it in there. And I think this creative force that's out there is uses the human spirit and uses humans to advance life, to advance human evolution, to advance things on this planet, to bring ideas that are here to positively fuel our evolution, and also to help us realize where we've made mistakes and to get us back on track. So the tools and techniques, with that as a preface, I think there's two things that I try to do. One is help people realize their future. And realize is a double entendre word. Realize is like, oh wow, I can actually dream about, create, identify, imagine a future. I have the skill to do that. My imagination is a gift. The thoughts I have, that even if there's no evidence or proof or data that they will ever exist, is a blessing that's being gifted to me. Realize your future. Then the other realize your future part is, okay, so what are the steps to help you get there? And then the second part is to help them realize their potential. A lot of people don't believe in themselves. There's some that do, but most people don't. They just say, I don't have the skill to do that. That's too big for me. There's no way I could figure that out. Who would believe me? I have imposter syndrome. So the two parts that I use as my core techniques are to first help somebody identify and imagine and envision and feel that we can create a safe, trusted place for them to start thinking about and imagining a very bold, unimaginable future. And then the second part is to help them identify inside of themselves that they actually do have what it takes to get there, should they choose to want to do it, because it still comes down to the choice. Because bringing creativity from out there into the world is one of the hardest things to do. You've got to go against the grain, you've got to challenge status quo, and a lot of the things that are gifted to us as creative ideas go against, or they challenge the core belief systems and fundamentals of human society. So my core techniques: realize future, realize potential, fuel it and back it up with courage, and then just start to take action on it.
Now, I remember reading Elizabeth Gilbert's Black Magic, and she talked about the ideas fairy, and exactly what you said. If you
really?
If you don't take
I
up
don't
the
know
idea,
this book.
Yeah, so
okay.
If you don't take up the idea,
that's
fairy's
it.
going to drop it on
I see this.
shoulder.
I see this. We go around the world and we'll be in creative sessions where companies get a monopoly on the future. Like they actually invent something, and you can. Sometimes I've had this very strange experience that I talk about sometimes, where we can go to China and do some work there, or come here to Australia. I'll go back to South America and Europe and Canada probably in the next couple of weeks. We'll do something there, and if we can push human thinking, you can actually touch the veil of where our human consciousness is, and actually put your hands there and then push it forward with ideas. And we'll go to different places, and people, without planting the seed or telling them that, oh, by the way, we just heard this in another room on the other side of the world, they will come up with something similar given the right circumstances. And then what we always sit back and try and figure out is, who's going to take advantage of this? Who's actually going to action on this? And that's where I feel our Be Courageous work versus the previous stuff I used to do, which is a lot of creative ideation and extracting those ideas. Now I would say in 100% capacity, about 30% is dreaming the unimaginable future, finding the potential inside, and then the rest of our work is 70% of activation. Like we have to take action. We've got to build habits and daily practices, and keep reminding ourselves and go through the hard work of dragging creativity into our reality, which is tough. It's really tough. Most people will quit because the process is really hard and scary. We're now doubling down on, let's get super inspired, but then let's take action on that.
I've got a saying that says ideation without execution is hallucination, so that fits perfectly,
it's true.
into that, yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
That sounds very Californian with
Yeah.
what's going on in California right now too. A lot of hallucinating.
Yeah, right. Okay. No. So okay, let's not go there. Or we could go there, because it is an interesting discussion as far as creativity goes, as far as the next iteration of what it is to be creative as well. But what I'd like to ask
people are looking. They're looking for the unimaginable. They're looking for new. They're looking for fresh. I personally think that whole movement, it's not something I've gotten into at all. I respect that people are trying to find their creativity. I personally think people are looking for signals and purpose and meaning, because the last few years have challenged everybody. Everybody got rocked to the core. All our fragilities were exposed. The theater was disrupted, the theater of just pretending to do but not really doing. And now people are questioning, do I really want to work that job? Is this truly my path? Do I like this partner I've been with? Do I want to live here? Do I want to work this way? Do I want this type of lifestyle? And the world has been designed so much for instant gratification and instant answers. And purpose isn't instantaneous. It takes work, creativity, building something. You know this better than most. Building a company, bringing something to the world, getting it scaled, getting it adopted, getting it realized, helping out. It takes time, and that's not instant. And I think people are trying to find these answers, and they're using a lot of different creative mediums to tap into who am I and what is my soul wanting,
We run a 9-hour program that goes over 3 weeks with a lot of homework in the middle for people to find their purpose, and still you can get to the end of that. And unless you've had those conversations and unless you've had the courage, as you say, to really look deep and to try and find what that purpose is, then still after that whole 9-hour process, you may not find it. I'd like to ask you, what do you find most challenging and where is the most opportunity in the world at the moment? Because the world is challenging, it's constantly changing. There's no such thing as certainty, which there never has been, by the way, in my belief system. There's never been this thing called certainty. But what is it that you find the most challenging and that gives you the biggest spark when you're working with different organisations?
Wow, great question today. What I'm finding the most challenging is the fear that is out there. Building a business is challenging, hiring the right team is challenging, scaling an operation, getting people to adopt what we would, our practices and principles, going up against the giant consulting firms and innovation firms as a young company. All of those things are challenging. And I think that's just business, that's just being in the game. But what I find the most challenging is the amount of creativity that exists and listening to people say, when you create the conditions for them, when they start speaking their truth from their heart, like heart-centered or purpose-centered conversations, most people are in things they don't want to be in. They're in jobs they don't want to be in, they're doing things, they're working with people they don't like, and they're frozen in that because of fear. And I find that fear is one of the biggest blockages to us being able to really put good things into the world, because it's so much easier to stay within our comfort zone. It's so much easier to stay in a comfortable place. It's a lot more difficult to find a courageous, charged mindset, because that process requires effort and it requires challenging. So I have a talk that I often give, which actually starts off by saying, I'm a failed innovator. I think we were doing some metrics where we've run several thousand sessions over the last 20 years around the world. And, I think a little more than 90% of all of the things that we help people create and invent in those sessions never ended up getting executed on. Now, there's a certain point that our job sort of finishes and they got to take it back into their business and do their job. But when we've gone back and said, how's that progressing? Oh no, we ended up not really executing on it. Even though it made a lot of sense and it was a good breakthrough for the business, the fear of the change and fear is what got in the way of that. And so I find that that's the thing that we wrestle the most with. And it's the thing that we're working the most on. And so there's something new that's just popped up, and so you'll hear it here first, is we, by the end of this year, just in the next couple of weeks, we will actually officially have the world's largest independent study on the psychology of courage in corporations.
Excellent.
We have spent this whole year working and partnering with academic institutions. We've gone out, and so we're starting to get really powerful data sets of what creates courageous behaviors and what doesn't, where the fear starts and how you can overcome that, which I'm so excited about being able to bring that to the world. But there's a couple of things that we found that where we can break the fear cycle. The very first one that you already talked to is that we must believe in something greater than what we fear. And a lot of the teams and organizations we've worked with have kind of gotten so big and they've scaled so successfully, but there isn't a shared sense of purpose anymore. The purposes come down to an OKR or a KPI or a metric or a shareholder outcome or a financial or market growth metric. But why does that matter is something that has been a little lost. And so we're noticing what's mitigating fear and almost kind of, because fear will never go away. We see courage and fear as partners. They're like in a marriage. With courage will always come fear, with fear will always come courage. And that's the thing that we try to leverage. So we find the fear and then we say, okay, so how do we now courage that moment? So we've turned courage into a verb. If you look at in the dictionary, it says it's a noun. And we're campaigning actively to ask the dictionaries to do an and. So it's a noun and it can be classed as a verb. So they're asking for that academic research from us. And I hope that at some point in the next year we'll actually get the dictionary changed. That courage is a verb, it's an action you can take by asking, what is the courage needed in this moment? How can I courage the situation, courage the job, courage the project, courage the relationship? And what that starts to do, what we found is, from a scientific perspective, it starts to access a different type of creativity. It's a creativity fueled by the invitation to think of something courageous. As soon as that happens, we notice that the fear response drops. And so our job now is to actually go in and find the trauma. So we've got a thing where I draw a line on the board now with organizations and leaders. I'll just draw a line and I say this, below the line is the traumas that we're harboring and suffering and that we haven't actually resolved. Above the line are all the ambitions we're trying to achieve. Career titles, wealth, revenue, success, whatever those things are. And we're now finding a direct correlation that the level that you want to ascend to is equal to the level of trauma you're going to need to address. It's the level of fear that you actually have to lean into. And that's been a game changer for us because the fear was the blocker. Now I'm realizing fear is the pathway to actually the thing to success. We're always trying to mitigate it and get around it. Now we're saying, no, we've got to go straight into it, you know.
We actually use the same line from timetable from birth to current.
Oh, the timeline's so
but
great.
But above the line, below the line, your 5 most uplifting moments,
Excellent.
your 5 most traumatic moments.
Yes.
How do we measure those and which aspects of those have led to where you are now? But I also find that adrenaline that fear can pump out is actually useful, not when it gets to the level of anxiety and high stress, but that little charge of adrenaline is very useful.
It is.
When you're trying to find that purpose. Yeah.
And I think that adrenaline that you get is the gift of the creative tap on the shoulder that says, you got this, like there's something here for you. But we got to find the belief, you got to find the self-confidence. And the way we find the self-confidence now is that people think that courage and addressing fear, you have to do this like monumental thing. You got to like, rah, you know, like the 300. You got to chase after a dragon and some beast. Yes, that's one way to do it. But the other way to do it is small daily incremental improvements in habits. So James Clear's 1% Daily Improvements, powerful book about habit formation. But to actually address fear, just chip away at it each day a little bit. Do something a little courageous each day. And what we find is if you can spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes on an activity, make one phone call, try one thing, push the body a little bit further, that one day, after 30 days, 45 days, you will see an exponentially different outcome in your life. And so we're breaking the fear response and the blockages down into much smaller bite sizes and chipping away at them, and we're actually finding that we can make massive progress that way.
You're saying that, and I'm seeing your vision before of the veil going back just a bit further. Yeah.
That's it. You know, and the big thing for us is, I mean, for those that are listening to this, I know that can sound meta and quite cerebral and quite spiritual, but the way that boils down to like tactical, pragmatic, daily things is improving communication. It's improving your leadership. It's what skills do you go and learn. It's how do I lead better today? How do I create psychologically safe environments for my teams? How do I start thinking about a strategy that is beyond just a fear response, what we call a toward strategy versus an away from strategy? I'm going to put something into the world because I don't want this thing to happen. Okay, that's one way to look at it. Or you could say, I'm going to put something into this world because I want to create this kind of outcome, which are two very different strategic approaches. And so just addressing this actually, like first building a relationship to what you fear, and then starting to build a relationship is what excites you beyond your fear, actually starts to get you to design a completely different way that you build culture, that you apply yourself in leadership, that you make strategic decisions, the way you innovate products, the way you serve customers. It influences all of that.
I actually think we are moving more to using intuition, to becoming, as Gary Zukov wrote in Seat of the Soul, multi-sensory rather than just 5 senses, which we're used to.
5D beings.
Yeah, but just use that multi-sensory approach. We are part of, for those of us that do believe that we are part of a bigger source of energy. We do need to tap into all of that, and I don't think it's an accident that mindfulness, yoga, all those meditation techniques are lifting at the moment to create, as you're saying, the opportunity for us to transcend fear towards courage. I think everything's happening at the right moment, and I find it really exciting, a really exciting place to work in, and I love the work that you're doing with courage, and to actually have the courage to call an organisation Be Courageous. Would you have done that 20 years ago?
Probably not, because I don't think we would have authentically lived up to it, to be honest. It was a tap and a calling, but when that calling came, when that bolt of lightning kind of came and said, like, this is something for you to go and do, it also came with it. But there's a disclaimer. There's almost kind of like, you know how you hear those Mattel commercials where, or you listen to those late night medical commercials where they go like, this will save your life. By the way, side effects include, you know, those kinds of things. Yeah. The tap came and it said, this is for you if you choose to take it. And by the way, the side effects are going to be long nights, a lot of resistance. You're going to bang your head against the wall many times. You're going to have naysayers. You know, it's not going to feel or sound credible. You're going to have to go up against big things and challenging things, and it's not going to be overnight. It's going to take time. And you've got to just sit with it, and you have to hold space for yourself and for others to find it, because we're tapping into some deep stuff. We've got to unhook and undo. And just to your point about yoga and meditation, and my take on that for those that struggle to still adopt those principles, I asked them, I frame it up in a different way. I asked them a question like this. I go, whose voice are you listening to when you make decisions? And they go, what do you mean? I said, okay, so think of something that's going to require courage for you to do. What shows up when you think about that? Oh, there's like a naysayer voice. Okay, so whose voice are you listening to? Oh, it's my mom, it's my dad, it's the boss, it's the thing, it's a past colleague, it's the press, it's the media, it's the government, and it's suddenly it's not their voice. And I said, okay, if we just get still, quiet, still, and tune into what sounds like your voice. What is your voice saying? Say, well, it's very quiet, but saying you can do this. And that's like, whose voice are you listening to? And if you find that you're being distracted by all this noise, then you got to get still. And there's so many practices to do it. Some people run, some walk, some meditate. I like to drum. It's actually technically the fastest way to go from an alpha to a beta state is to get into rhythm. It requires an ambidextrous use of the body and the mind and all that kind of stuff. That's my thing, because I struggle to sort of sit. Although I love the idea of meditation, I just suck at doing it. But what gets me to do it is when I feel I'm out of integrity with my own voice, my own inner voice. I'm listening to things and I'm feeling stress and I'm feeling anxiety, and I'm like, this doesn't feel right. I think I'm believing a thought that isn't real. I'm listening to a voice that doesn't feel mine, because I don't think that my own self would try to make me feel smaller or stop these creative ideas. I think it would support it. So let me get back in rhythm and in alignment with that voice. And then people just have to find the way to do that. So whose voice are you listening to?
I love that. That's a great tagline. Whose voice are you listening to?
Yeah, whose voice are you listening to? And most of the time when I do it, and again, back to the fear and the courage, because they come hand in hand, the fear voice is never the person's voice. Unless, of course, they're standing on the edge of a cliff and they're about to die, then the fear voice is like, take a step back. Of course, like, trust that part of your voice.
Sorry.
No, but for the most part, the fear voice is very rarely that person's voice. The courageous voice inside is almost 100% always that person's voice. And so it's an interesting tune-in for us, you know.
I think that's a perfect thing to leave people inspired with, because I'm sure I could sit here and talk to you for the next 3 hours. Kyle Hermans, thank you so much for sharing
you're so welcome.
Who you are and what you do.
And thank you so much for having me here. And for anybody listening to this, come and join one of these programs. It will change your life.